Henry Ford tried to put an end to World War One, which he knew was a tragic, absurd conflict between European people that were not only closely related, but were led by people who were literally related. King George of Britain, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. These were cousins, all related to Queen Victoria, and the list goes on. The amount of people that were in leadership that were related to each other is astounding. And so Henry Ford in 1915 starts the World War One peace ship, a large ship that had an expedition to Europe, and he hoped to negotiate an end to World War One. He was sort of the American diplomat here to unite Europe. And the mission is ridiculed in the press. All of a sudden, all the newspapers are making fun of it. They could have supported it. The newspapers could have applauded it. It could have been a great piece for them if they had good intentions. And that was one of the first things that made him a little suspect. Why is it that these newspapers don't want to support peace? Why do they want World War One to keep going? So he purchases Dearborn Independent, a local newspaper, turns it into a serious platform. He's got serious money, and he pumps money into it. And let's just say Ford had a few run-ins personally with Jewish power. He's at the top of finance. He's one of the richest people in the world, and he sees firsthand a lot of skullduggery, we'll call it. And so he, with the Dodge brothers, who famously have a Star of David as their logo, despite denying their relation to the practitioners of Judaism, he saw firsthand what was going on, and he learned about things such as the Warburg brothers, Paul Warburg and Max Warburg. One's in the USA, one's in Germany, and they're running a bank scheme, deliberately exploiting World War One. Everyone knows about the Rothschilds' banking scheme of during World War One, and the list goes on. There's very powerful people who are cosmopolitan. They're not of one nation. They're in different nations, and yet they're united against these people. Paul Warburg later starts the Federal Reserve System. They call him the father of the Fed because he serves as leadership for it. And he served during World War One. And Max Warburg, he's cooperating with his brother from afar. And a lot of people like to write up this concern as delusional and paranoia. There's no basis to it, but it's in black and white. You could read about it yourself. It's not some delusional fantasy. No, it actually did happen. Banking schemes did occur, and extreme transfers of wealth had occurred. And so he finds out about this reality. He starts writing about this and paying a lot of people to write about it. And he eventually gets into serious legal challenges. He actually has to write this seemingly insincere apology. He's being attacked by lawyers and sued constantly. And he eventually has to sort of quiet down his concern over these banking schemes. But his books, one called The International Jew, which talks about how cosmopolitan people in different countries are working together, um, was translated into German. And so this had a huge influence. And it's not just an influence on Germany. It's seemingly the biggest influence on the leader of National Socialism. It was such a big deal that when he was asked, Adolf would say that that was one of his biggest inspirations. That's one of his heroes. Such a to such a degree that he had this gigantic painting, a life-sized painting of Henry Ford in his Munich office. So he greatly admired him. They distributed his material as part of their sort of propaganda in the National Socialist movement. On his 75th birthday, Ford received a Grand Cross of the German Eagle, which is the highest honor that they would ever give a foreigner, an Auslander. And what's fascinating is before the U.S. entry into World War II, Ford Motor Company, which Henry is not truly leading by hand. He's now very old. I mean, he was 75 in 1938. So by this point, he's an elderly man. Ford Motor Company subsidiaries in Europe, including Germany, are linked to armament production in Germany, though corporate control was complex under wartime conditions. And this was not strange. For a time, Coca-Cola was being shipped to Nazi Germany. There were trades being had, and later, that's the birth of Fanta. They had to create Fanta to replace Coca-Cola after they stopped. And so they're technically helping the other side before America gets involved. But then Pearl Harbor occurs, and Ford Motor Company becomes a major U.S. defense contractor, producing tanks, aircraft engines, jeeps, famous B-24 Liberator bomber. And Henry Ford retires in 1945, turning leadership back to his grandson. But one could say that he wasn't behind every decision. But it is fascinating how, because of Pearl Harbor, Ford had to switch to the Allies. And probably, one could say, without Ford's involvement, the Allied troops would have not been as strong, and potentially that changed the outcome of the war. And so and by the way, Joseph Goebbels publicly addressed that, and they called him a sort of tool of the Jews and a traitor and whatnot. So they actually did respond, if you're wondering. But it's just fascinating how one person could tie World War I to World War II to such a degree, and how he could be on both sides of a war to such an extent. Fascinating. What is the lesson here?